Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palms against the cool stone tablet, feeling the rough texture of symbols that had puzzled the galaxy's greatest minds for over 2 centuries. The Kepler research station buzzed with activity around her, but she barely noticed the constant hum of machines and distant conversations. Her dark eyes traced the intricate markings that covered every inch of the ancient artifact, searching for patterns that others had missed. Still trying to crack the impossible code? Dr. Tharn's voice carried the familiar tone of condescending amusement. The Altarian historian stood in the doorway, his blue-scaled skin catching the laboratory's harsh lighting. His forearms were crossed in a gesture that clearly showed his opinion of Elena's work. Elena didn't look up from her examination. Every code can be broken. It's just a matter of finding the right approach. Tharn's laugh sounded like water bubbling over rocks. Humans and their stubborn optimism. Do you know how many brilliant minds have studied this tablet? The Council of Worlds assigned their best cryptographers, linguists, and archaeologists to this project. Species with mental capabilities far superior to yours have declared it impossible to translate. Maybe that's the problem, Elena murmured, running her fingers along a series of curved symbols that seemed to dance in her peripheral vision. What did you say? Tharn stepped closer, his large black eyes narrowing. Elena finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Maybe all those brilliant minds are approaching this wrong. Sometimes the most complex problems need the simplest solutions. The Altarian scale shifted color slightly, a sign of irritation that Elena had learned to recognize during their months working together. The Xerian Mathematics Guild spent 3 years analyzing the mathematical progressions in these symbols. The Thesian Language Institute dedicated their entire linguistics department to studying the grammatical structures. The Vorten Archaeological Society used quantum computing systems to test every possible translation matrix. Are you suggesting that all of these superior intellects missed something obvious? Elena shrugged, returning her attention to the tablet. I'm saying that maybe being superior isn't always an advantage. Sometimes you need to think like the people who created something to understand it. The ancients were clearly an advanced civilization, Tharn protested. Their technology was sophisticated enough to create materials that our current science cannot reproduce. Their mathematical concepts appear to transcend our current understanding of dimensional physics. Their artistic techniques show mastery of principles we have yet to discover. This is not the work of primitive minds. Advanced doesn't mean complicated, Elena said, photographing a section of symbols with her portable scanner. Humans have a saying, the best solutions are often the most elegant ones. Maybe the ancients understood that. Tharn moved to his own workstation, where holographic displays showed the previous translation attempts by dozens of species. Charts and graphs covered every surface, displaying the failed efforts of some of the galaxy's most respected scholars. Look at this data, Dr. Vasquez. The Calorian cipher masters attempted over 4 million possible interpretations. The Nexus Artificial Intelligence Network processed the symbols through every known language structure in the galactic database. The results were consistent across all attempts. The text appears to be deliberately designed to resist translation. Elena pulled up her own notes on her tablet computer. Unlike the complex displays surrounding Tharn's workspace, her screen showed simple hand-drawn sketches and basic word associations. What if it's not designed to resist translation? What if it's designed to be read by a specific type of mind? You mean primitive minds? The sarcasm in Tharn's voice was impossible to miss. I mean minds that think in certain patterns, Elena corrected patiently. Every species approaches problems based on their evolutionary background and cultural development. Altarians think in complex mathematical relationships because your brains evolved to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. Calorians see everything through the lens of hierarchical structures because of your rigid social systems. Thesians approach language through emotional resonance because communication is tied to your empathic abilities. Tharn's scales flickered again. And how do humans think, Dr. Vasquez? Elena smiled, the first genuine expression she had shown all morning. We see patterns where others see chaos. We make connections that don't seem logical to other species. We solve problems by intuition as much as analysis. And we never give up on something just because everyone else says it's impossible. Intuition is not a reliable method for archaeological translation, Tharn stated firmly. Scientific methodology requires reproducible results, verified hypotheses, and logical progression of evidence. What you call intuition, others would call guesswork. Elena stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the planet below. Kepler 442b stretched out beneath them, its surface covered in the ruins of the ancient civilization that had vanished millennia ago. Massive structures dotted the landscape, their purpose is still unknown despite decades of study. Tell me something, Dr. Tharn. In all your research about the ancients, what have you learned about their daily lives? The question seemed to catch the Altarian off guard. Daily lives? We focus on their technological achievements, their architectural capabilities, their apparent mastery of advanced sciences. But what did they eat? How did they raise their children? What made them laugh? What scared them? Elena turned back to face him. Everyone studies their accomplishments, but no one tries to understand them as people. Because such information is irrelevant to understanding their written language, Tharn replied, though his tone had lost some of its earlier certainty. Elena walked back to the tablet, but this time she didn't examine the symbols. Instead, she looked at the overall composition, the way the text was arranged on the stone surface. What if it's not irrelevant? What if understanding them as people is exactly what we need to read their writing? Before Tharn could respond, the laboratory door slid open and Captain Morrison entered. The human military officer looked tired, his gray hair disheveled and his uniform wrinkled from another long night of dealing with the complex politics surrounding the ancient ruins. Any progress, doctors? Morrison asked, though his expression suggested he wasn't expecting good news. Dr. Vasquez believes she has a new approach, Tharn said carefully. Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly. Oh? What kind of approach? Elena hesitated, knowing how her theory would sound to a military mind trained in concrete results and practical outcomes. I think we've been trying too hard to be smart about this. Maybe the ancients wrote this to be read by people who think simply, who see things directly without overcomplicating them. You think the writing is simple? Morrison asked. I think the writing is human, Elena said quietly. The silence that followed was so complete that the usual laboratory sounds seemed unnaturally loud. Tharn's scales had shifted to a pale blue color that Elena had never seen before. Morrison stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Human? Morrison repeated slowly. Elena nodded, her heart racing as she committed to her theory. The mathematical progressions that confused the Zirions? They're based on counting systems that match human finger patterns. The grammatical structures that puzzled the Thessians? They follow emotional logic patterns that human brains use naturally. The artistic techniques that seemed so mysterious? They're variations on methods that human artists have used for thousands of years. Tharn found his voice first. That's impossible. Humans have only been in space for a few hundred years. This civilization died out over 10,000 years ago. The biological evidence clearly shows that humans evolved on Earth, nowhere near this system. I know it sounds crazy, Elena admitted. But, look at this symbol here. She pointed to a marking that resembled a stylized tree. Every species that examined this saw it as a representation of growth, life force, or biological complexity. But, to me, it looks like a family tree. And this one. She moved to another symbol. Everyone interpreted this as a mathematical constant, but what if it's just showing how many children a family had? Morrison stepped closer to examine the symbols Elena was indicating. You're saying this isn't a technical manual or historical record? I'm saying it's a story, Elena said, excitement growing in her voice. Look at the arrangement. It doesn't follow the logical progression that you'd expect from a scientific text. It flows like a narrative, with emotional peaks and valleys, with repeating themes that call back to earlier sections. It's literature, not documentation. Tharn's forearms gestured dismissively. Even if your interpretation is correct, which I highly doubt, it still doesn't explain how humans could have created this text thousands of years before Earth humans developed space travel. Elena turned to face both men, her mind racing with possibilities that seemed to expand with each passing moment. Maybe Earth humans didn't create it. Maybe humans didn't start on Earth. The implications of her statement hung in the air like an electrical charge before a storm. Morrison's face had gone pale, while Farn's scales had shifted through several colors before settling on a deep purple that Elena associated with intense concentration. "You're suggesting that humans originated elsewhere," Morrison said slowly. "I'm suggesting that maybe humanity is older than we think," Elena replied. "Maybe we've been looking at our own history and calling it alien archaeology." Farn began pacing, his multiple arms moving in complex patterns as his mind processed this new possibility. The dating methods are reliable. Carbon analysis, radioactive decay measurements, geological stratification analysis. All the evidence points to these ruins being over 10,000 years old. "And maybe that's how old human civilization really is," Elena said. "Maybe Earth was a colony, not the origin point. Maybe we've been searching the galaxy for other intelligent life while sitting on a planet that was already a backup plan." Morrison sat down heavily in one of the laboratory chairs. "If you're right, this changes everything. Human space exploration, our understanding of our own evolution, our place in the galactic community. It would explain certain anomalies in human development," Farn admitted reluctantly. "The rapid advancement of human technology once space travel began. The intuitive understanding humans show for complex systems that should require generations of study. The way human children learn languages with a facility that surpasses most adult members of other species." Elena felt a chill of excitement run down her spine. "It would also explain why this text feels readable to me. My brain is wired to understand it because my ancestors wrote it." She turned back to the tablet, but now instead of seeing mysterious symbols, she began to see familiar patterns. The flowing script reminded her of handwriting styles she had studied in Earth's historical documents. The way ideas were connected followed logical progressions that made sense to her human mind. "If I'm right," she said softly, "then this isn't just a translation project anymore. This is an attempt to reconnect with our own lost history." Morrison stood up and walked to the communication panel. "I need to contact Earth Command. If there's even a possibility that you're correct, this becomes a matter of human security and identity." "Wait," Tharn said quickly. "Before we alert anyone, shouldn't we test this theory? Dr. Vasquez, if you truly believe you can read this text, then prove it. Translate a section and show us that your interpretation makes sense." Elena looked down at the ancient tablet, feeling the weight of history and possibility pressing against her shoulders. The symbols that had resisted translation for over 2 centuries suddenly seemed less mysterious, more familiar. She could almost feel the presence of the ancient writer, someone who had carved these words into stone with the hope that someday, someone would understand their message. "Give me 24 hours, she said quietly. "If I'm right, I'll have the beginning of a translation. If I'm wrong, I'll admit that I was chasing impossible theories." Farn nodded slowly. 24 hours. "But, Dr. Vasquez, I hope you understand the magnitude of what you're suggesting. If humans are descendants of the ancients, it doesn't just change archaeology. It changes politics, philosophy, and humanity's relationship with every other species in the galaxy." Elena picked up her portable scanner and began taking detailed photographs of every section of the tablet. "I know. That's exactly why I have to try." As the two men left the laboratory, Elena remained alone with the ancient text. She pulled up a chair and settled in for what she knew would be a long night of work. Outside the window, Kepler 442b continued its slow rotation, the ancient ruins casting long shadows across the landscape as the system's star moved toward the horizon. For the first time since arriving at the research station, Elena felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She wasn't just trying to solve an academic puzzle anymore. She was trying to come home. Elena's eyes burned from staring at the tablet for 16 straight hours. Coffee cups littered her workstation, and crumpled papers covered the floor around her chair. But she was making progress. The symbols that had seemed like random markings yesterday now formed recognizable patterns, familiar rhythms that spoke to something deep in her genetic memory. The breakthrough had come at 3 in the morning, when exhaustion finally forced her to stop overthinking. She had been approaching the text like an academic puzzle, trying to apply linguistic theories and mathematical formulas. But when fatigue made her analytical mind quiet down, her intuitive understanding took over. The symbols began to tell a story. In the season of long shadows, when the children learned to count the stars, Mira wrote these words for those who would come after. Elena spoke the translation aloud, her voice echoing in the empty laboratory. The first sentence of the ancient text had revealed itself like a key turning in a lock, opening pathways to understanding that she hadn't known existed. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples, trying to process what she was discovering. The text wasn't a technical manual or historical record. It was a personal journal, written by someone named Mira during what appeared to be a time of great change for her people. And the voice that emerged from the ancient symbols was unmistakably human in its concerns, hopes, and fears. The laboratory door slid open, and Dr. Tharn entered carrying a steaming mug of something that smelled like cinnamon and metal. His scales showed the muted green color that Elena had learned indicated cautious curiosity. "You missed dinner," he said, setting the mug down beside her workstation. "And breakfast. And lunch." Elena glanced at the chronometer display and was surprised to see that it was already mid-afternoon. "I lost track of time. But, Tharn, I think I was right. I think I can read this." The Altarian's 4 eyes focused on her with sharp attention. "Show me." Elena pulled up her translation notes on her computer screen. Unlike the complex algorithmic approaches that previous scholars had attempted, her work looked almost primitive. Hand-drawn sketches connected symbols to simple words. Basic grammatical structures were mapped out in pencil on paper scraps. There were no mathematical formulas or linguistic matrices. "The first section is an introduction," she explained, pointing to the opening lines of symbols on the tablet. "Mira is explaining why she's writing this record. She says her people are facing a great journey, and she wants to leave something behind for future generations to find." Tharn examined her notes with obvious skepticism. "How can you be certain of these translations? What verification methodology are you using?" Elena took a sip of the drink he had brought her. It tasted like tea mixed with starlight, strange but comforting. "I'm reading it the way my grandmother read to me when I was little. I'm not analyzing every word for multiple possible meanings. I'm following the flow of the story and letting the context tell me what each symbol means." "That's not scientific translation," Tharn protested. "You could be projecting human concepts onto alien symbols. You could be seeing what you want to see rather than what's actually there." Elena stood up and stretched, working out the kinks in her back from hours of sitting hunched over the tablet. "Maybe. But look at this section here." She pointed to a cluster of symbols near the middle of the text. Every previous translation attempt interpreted these markings as mathematical constants or technical specifications. But, if you read them as emotional expressions, they become something completely different. She traced the symbols with her finger as she spoke. "Mira is writing about her children. She's worried about whether they'll be safe during the journey. She's describing how her youngest daughter is afraid of the stars, how her son keeps asking questions about where they're going. These aren't technical specifications. They're the concerns of a mother facing an uncertain future." Tharn was quiet for a long moment, studying both the symbols and Elena's translation notes. "Even if your interpretation is correct," he said finally, "it doesn't prove that these ancients were human ancestors. Many species experience parental concern for offspring." "True," Elena agreed. "But look at how she expresses those concerns. The metaphor she uses, the way she structures her thoughts, the priorities she focuses on. It all follows patterns that human psychology recognizes as familiar." She walked to another section of the tablet, her excitement growing as she pointed out specific details. Here, she writes about teaching her children to recognize constellations as navigation aids for the journey. But, she also mentions using the same star patterns to tell stories that will help them remember their home. That combination of practical and emotional thinking? That's very human. The laboratory door opened again, and Captain Morrison entered with Commander Chen, the station's chief science officer. Both humans looked like they hadn't slept much since Elena's announcement the previous day. "Dr. Vasquez," Morrison said. "I've been in communication with Earth Command. They want a full report on your translation theory. The implications are significant enough that they're sending a specialized team to evaluate your work." Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. "How specialized?" Commander Chen stepped forward. "Linguistic experts, evolutionary biologists, archaeological dating specialists, and political analysts. If you're right about humans being descended from the ancients, it affects our standing in the Galactic Council, our territorial claims, our trade agreements, and our diplomatic relationships with every other species." "No pressure," Elena muttered. Fine's scales shifted to an amber color that indicated deep thought. "There's another consideration. If Dr. Vasquez's translation is accurate, we need to determine what happened to the ancient human civilization. Why did they leave this planet? Where did they go? How did Earth become populated with humans who had no memory of their origins?" Elena turned back to the tablet, scanning the sections she hadn't yet translated. "Actually, I think Mira might be about to tell us exactly that. The next part of her journal seems to describe the reason for their journey." She sat down and began working through the symbols, speaking her translation aloud as she deciphered each line. "The homeworld grows cold. The star that warmed our children dims with each passing season. The scholars say we have perhaps 50 generations before the light fails completely. We must find new suns, new worlds where our children can grow and learn and love as we have loved." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the station's environmental systems. Elena continued translating, her voice growing more confident as the story unfolded. "Some will go to the distant stars, seeking worlds that circle young suns. Others will journey to the spiral's edge, where space is vast and possibilities endless. But the greatest hope lies in the seeds we will plant on the blue world, the one the scouts found in the system of the yellow star. It is young and wild, but it has potential. Our children there will grow strong, even if they forget the old home." Morrison sat down slowly, his face pale. "They're describing Earth. The blue world, the yellow star. They're talking about colonizing Earth." Elena nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she continued to translate. "It gets more specific. Listen to this: the blue world has one moon, large and silver, that pulls the tides. The land masses are separated by vast oceans. The air is rich with the breath of life. It will be perfect for our children, once they adapt to its rhythms." Commander Chen leaned forward. "This is describing Earth's geography. If this text is truly 10,000 years old, then humans were describing Earth before our recorded history even begins." Fine's scales had shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue that Elena had never seen before. "This implies a level of space travel capability that we have no evidence for. How did ancients with stone carving technology achieve interstellar colonization?" Elena continued translating, and the answer began to emerge from Myra's words. "The great ships are nearly ready. The builders have worked for many generations to perfect the deep sleep chambers, the star navigation systems, the life support gardens that will sustain our people during the long journey. Each ship will carry 10,000 souls, along with the seeds of our knowledge, our stories, our hopes for the future." "Advanced technology hidden by time," Morrison murmured. "Their space capabilities degraded or were lost, but their knowledge of stoneworking and basic survival skills carried over to Earth." Elena found herself reading faster, caught up in Myra's story as if it were a novel instead of an archaeological document. "The hardest choice is what to leave behind. We cannot carry our great libraries, our vast cities, our accumulated history. Each ship is limited in what it can preserve. So we choose practical knowledge for survival, cultural stories for identity, and records like this one, hidden where future generations might find them and remember." "They deliberately left clues," Chen said. They wanted their descendants to eventually find their way back. Elena continued reading, but her voice began to falter as she reached a section that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I will not live to see the blue world. Age takes me before the ships depart. But my daughter Kara will make the journey, and her daughter after her. They will carry my stories to the new home. They will teach their children to look up at the stars and remember that we came from somewhere else, that we are part of something larger than one world. She paused, wiping at her eyes. I will hide this record in the deep places, along with others like it. Perhaps the explorers who remain on the dying worlds will find ways to survive. Perhaps they will develop new technologies to revive the old star. But if they fail, if the homeworld truly dies, then at least our children on the blue world will eventually grow strong enough to return. They will find these words and know their true history. The laboratory was completely silent. Elena looked up from the tablet to find three faces staring at her with expressions of awe, fear, and wonder. She's writing to us, Morrison said quietly. Mira is writing directly to us. Her great-great-grandchildren who made it back to the stars. Elena nodded, feeling the weight of 10,000 years of separation from her ancestors. There's more. She describes the journey routes, the star maps, even the names of other colony destinations. If this information is accurate, Earth wasn't the only human settlement. There could be other human populations scattered across the galaxy. Farn's multiple arms gestured in complex patterns that Elena recognized as his species' equivalent of deep shock. This changes our understanding of galactic colonization patterns. If humans were spacefaring 10,000 years ago, they may have encountered other species that we have no record of. Or, Commander Chen said slowly, they may have been the first. Humanity might have been exploring the galaxy before any of the current Council species developed space travel. Elena turned back to the tablet, scanning the remaining sections. I think there's more information here about the other colonies, about what happened to the people who stayed behind, about the technology they used for the journey. But it's going to take time to translate all of it. Morrison stood up and walked to the communication panel. I'm sending an immediate update to Earth Command. This isn't just archaeological research anymore. This is about humanity's place in galactic history. As he began composing his message, Elena returned her attention to the ancient text. But now instead of seeing mysterious symbols, she saw the words of a woman who had lived and loved and worried about her children thousands of years before Elena was born. A woman who had faced the end of her world with courage and hope, trusting that someday her descendants would be strong enough to return and learn their true story. Thank you, Mira, Elena whispered to the tablet. We found our way home. Tharn approached her workstation, his scales now showing the soft yellow color that indicated respect and admiration. Dr. Vasquez, I owe you an apology. Your intuitive approach has accomplished what decades of systematic analysis could not. Perhaps there is something to be said for thinking like the original authors. Elena smiled, exhaustion finally beginning to catch up with her. Sometimes the simplest approach is the right one. Mira wasn't trying to create an unsolvable puzzle. She was just trying to tell her story in a way that her children would understand. She looked out the laboratory window at the ancient ruins stretching across the planet's surface. What had seemed like mysterious alien architecture yesterday now looked like something else entirely, the remnants of a human civilization that had faced impossible odds and chosen hope over despair. We're not just translating an ancient text, she realized aloud. We're rediscovering our own heritage. We're learning that humans didn't come from nowhere. We came from here, and from a dozen other worlds, and from ancestors who were brave enough to cross the galaxy to give us a future. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Elena settled back to continue her translation work. She had thousands of symbols left to decipher, and each one brought her closer to understanding not just what the ancients had written, but who they were and how they had shaped humanity's destiny among the stars. The specialized team from Earth arrived on Kepler Research Station like a diplomatic hurricane. Dr. Sarah Kim led the linguistic analysis group, while Professor Marcus Webb brought his evolutionary biology team. Dr. Amanda Foster headed the archaeological dating specialists, and Director James Harrison coordinated the political implications assessment. Elena watched them establish their equipment in the main laboratory, feeling like a graduate student who had stumbled onto something far bigger than she could handle. Dr. Vasquez, Director Harrison said, approaching her workstation with the careful manner of someone accustomed to dealing with sensitive situations. Before we begin our verification process, I want you to understand the scope of what you've potentially discovered. If your translation is accurate, it could fundamentally alter humanity's position in the Galactic Council. Elena nodded, trying not to let her nervousness show. I understand the implications. But, I think you need to understand something too. This isn't just about politics or archaeology anymore. Myra's journal contains information that could change how we think about human potential and our future in space. Dr. Kim set up her holographic analysis equipment next to the ancient tablet. Show us your methodology, Dr. Vasquez. How exactly are you approaching these symbols differently from previous attempts? Elena pulled up her translation notes, still feeling embarrassed by their simple appearance compared to the sophisticated systems surrounding them. I'm reading them as personal communication rather than formal documentation. I'm looking for emotional context and storytelling patterns instead of technical precision. Professor Webb examined the symbols through a magnifying scanner. The dating analysis confirms the tablet's age at approximately 10,000 years. If humans created this text, it predates our earliest recorded Earth civilizations by several millennia. Which supports the colony theory, Elena said. According to Myra's journal, Earth was specifically chosen as a settlement world for young humans who would adapt and grow strong while the homeworld civilization dealt with their dying star. She guided them to a section she had translated the previous night. This part describes the selection process for Earth colonists. They weren't sending their entire population. They were sending their most adaptable individuals, people who could survive and thrive under primitive conditions while retaining essential cultural knowledge. Dr. Foster looked up from her equipment readings. That would explain certain anomalies in human development patterns. Why humans show such rapid adaptation to different environments, why our technological development accelerated so dramatically once we achieved spaceflight, why human children demonstrate learning capabilities that seem to exceed what our evolutionary timeline should support. Elena continued translating the relevant section aloud. The children of the blue world will not remember the old technologies. They will learn to work with their hands, to read the natural world, to solve problems without complex tools. But, in their blood, they will carry the memory of the stars. When they grow strong enough, when they rediscover the paths between worlds, they will remember who they truly are. Director Harrison sat down heavily. She's describing a deliberate technological reset. They sent colonists to Earth with basic survival skills but, without advanced technology, expecting them to redevelop space travel independently. More than that, Elena said, pointing to another section. Look at this. Mira writes about genetic markers that were specifically enhanced in the Earth colony population. Adaptability genes, problem-solving neural pathways, curiosity drives, and something she calls star hunger, an innate desire to explore beyond the home environment. Dr. Kim's translation analysis system began displaying data as it processed Elena's work. The linguistic patterns are consistent with proto-human language structures. Dr. Vasquez, your intuitive approach has identified grammatical relationships that our systematic analysis completely missed. Professor Webb was studying his biological scanner readouts with growing excitement. The genetic markers she mentions, we know about those. We call them human baseline traits, but we've never understood why they're so pronounced compared to other Earth species. If these traits were artificially enhanced in an original colony population, then humans aren't just another evolutionary species, Elena finished. We're specifically designed for space exploration and adaptation. She turned to a section of the tablet that she had been hesitant to translate, knowing how unbelievable it would sound. There's more. Mira describes what she calls the great purpose, the reason why her people spread across the galaxy in the first place. The room fell quiet as Elena began reading her translation. Long ago, when our ancestors first looked up at the night sky, they received a signal from beyond the known stars. A message from minds vast and ancient, calling to any species wise enough to listen. The message spoke of a great gathering, a convergence of intelligence that would occur when the galaxy's children were ready to join the larger universe. Director Harrison leaned forward. Are you saying the ancients had contact with another intelligence? Something beyond the species we know today? Elena nodded, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. According to Mira, humanity's expansion across the galaxy wasn't random exploration. It was preparation for something much larger. They were positioning human populations to serve as ambassadors, I think. Bridge builders between different forms of consciousness. She continued translating the complex section. The signal spoke of others like us, scattered among distant galaxies, each developing their own understanding of existence. When the time is right, when the children of all the different worlds have learned wisdom and compassion, there will be a great meeting. The boundaries between galaxies will open, and intelligence will share itself across the universe. Dr. Kim's equipment was processing the linguistic patterns frantically, displaying probability matrices and grammatical analyses. The translation accuracy is consistently above 90%. Dr. Vasquez isn't projecting human concepts onto alien symbols. She's reading genuinely human text. Elena found herself caught up in Myra's vision as she continued to decipher the ancient woman's words. Humanity's role in this gathering was to be the connectors. Our adaptability, our curiosity, our ability to understand and communicate with different types of minds, these traits were specifically developed to prepare us for contact with intelligences that think in ways completely unlike our own. Professor Webb was staring at his readouts with an expression of wonder. This explains human psychological traits that have always puzzled evolutionary biologists. Our disproportionate empathy responses, our pattern recognition abilities, our compulsive need to communicate with anything that shows signs of intelligence. We're not just adapted for survival. We're adapted for contact. Elena turned to another section of the tablet, one that made her heart race with its implications. But something went wrong. Mira writes about a catastrophe that disrupted the plan. The signal from beyond the stars suddenly stopped. The ancient minds that had been guiding humanity's development went silent. She traced the symbols carefully, making sure her translation was accurate. Without the guidance signal, the different human populations lost contact with each other. The homeworld civilization couldn't maintain their dying star. The colony worlds were left to develop on their own, some thriving, others failing. The great purpose was forgotten, surviving only in stories and instincts that people couldn't fully understand. Director Harrison stood up and began pacing. So Earth humans aren't just descendants of an ancient civilization. We're part of a galactic network that was designed for interstellar diplomacy, and we've been operating without our full instructions for 10,000 years. Elena nodded, then pointed to the final sections of Myra's journal. But she believed the signal would return. She writes about signs to watch for, indicators that the ancient minds were resuming their guidance. And she describes what humanity should do when that time comes. Dr. Foster looked up from her archaeological analysis. What kind of signs? Elena's translation of Myra's words sent chills through the laboratory. The return will be marked by human children who see patterns that others cannot see, who solve problems in ways that seem impossible, who instinctively understand technologies they have never studied. When such children become common, when human intuition begins to surpass logical analysis, that will signal that the ancient guidance is returning. The room was completely silent as the implications of this statement settled over everyone present. Elena looked around at the faces of Earth's finest scientists and realized they were all thinking the same thing. Human technological advancement in the past century, Professor Webb said slowly. The acceleration hasn't followed normal developmental patterns. Children today demonstrate intuitive understanding of complex systems that should require years of study. Dr. Kim nodded. Linguistic development, pattern recognition, problem-solving abilities. Human children are consistently outperforming prediction models based on historical data. Elena turned back to the tablet, her hands trembling as she read Myra's final instructions. When the signs appear, humanity must prepare for the Great Gathering. We must reunite the scattered populations, rediscover our lost technologies, and remember our purpose as bridge builders between different forms of consciousness. The ancient minds will return with new guidance, and humanity must be ready to fulfill our original destiny. Director Harrison stopped pacing and stared at Elena. You're saying that current human development patterns might indicate that this ancient contact is resuming? That we're approaching some kind of galactic convergence? Elena read the last section of Myra's journal, her voice barely audible. The children of the blue world will be the key. They will retain the strongest connection to the ancient guidance because their world was chosen specifically for its ability to preserve essential human traits. When the time comes, it will be Earth humans who lead the reunification and prepare for the Great Gathering. She looked up from the tablet to find everyone staring at her with expressions of awe and uncertainty. Mira ends her journal with coordinates. Star maps showing the locations of other human colonies, the routes to the homeworld, and, most importantly, the position where the signal originated. She's giving us everything we need to reconnect with our scattered family and prepare for whatever comes next. Dr. Foster was studying her dating analysis results with growing amazement. The precision of these star coordinates is remarkable. If they're accurate, we could potentially locate other human populations that have been developing independently for 10,000 years. Elena stood up and walked to the laboratory window, looking out at the ancient ruins that covered Kepler 442b's surface. What had seemed like the remains of a dead civilization yesterday now looked like something completely different, a message depot, a library left by her ancestors to guide humanity when they were ready to rediscover their true purpose. We're not just archaeologists anymore, she said quietly. We're not just translating ancient text. We're receiving instructions for humanity's future role in the galaxy. Professor Webb joined her at the window. If your translation is accurate, then everything we thought we knew about human origins, our relationship with other species, our future development, all of it needs to be reconsidered. Elena turned back to face the group. The question isn't whether my translation is accurate. The question is whether we're ready to act on what Mira is telling us. Are we prepared to search for other human colonies? Are we ready to investigate the source of the original signal? Are we willing to consider that humanity's destiny might be much larger than we ever imagined? Director Harrison was already reaching for his communication equipment. I'm contacting Earth Command immediately. This information needs to reach the highest levels of human leadership. We're talking about potentially the most significant discovery in human history. Elena looked back at the ancient tablet, feeling the weight of Myra's trust across 10,000 years of separation. The woman who had carved these words into stone had believed that someday her descendants would be strong enough and wise enough to understand their true heritage. She had trusted that when the time came, humanity would be ready to rejoin the larger universe and fulfill their purpose as builders of understanding between different forms of consciousness. Thank you, Mira, Elena whispered again. We're listening. And we'll try to be worthy of what you've given us. As the Earth team began implementing protocols for the most classified discovery in human history, Elena realized that her simple desire to translate an ancient text had become something much more profound. She hadn't just solved an archaeological puzzle. She had opened the door to humanity's forgotten destiny among the stars. 6 months after Elena's initial translation breakthrough, the Kepler research station had transformed into the most classified facility in human space. The ancient tablet now sat in a climate-controlled chamber surrounded by the most advanced analysis equipment that Earth science could provide. But the real revolution was happening in Elena's mind as she worked through the complete archive that subsequent excavations had revealed. The ancients hadn't left just one tablet. They had left an entire library. 57 tablets so far, Elena reported to the daily briefing session, her voice hoarse from hours of continuous translation work. Each one contains detailed information about different aspects of the original human civilization. We have star maps, technological schematics, cultural archives, genetic enhancement protocols, and something that appears to be a comprehensive manual for interstellar diplomacy. Director Harrison looked older than when he had first arrived. The weight of managing humanity's most significant discovery was clearly taking its toll. What about the contact protocols? Have you found anything that explains how we're supposed to recognize this ancient guidance when it returns? Elena pulled up her latest translation on the main display screen. The symbols float across the holographic projector like liquid poetry, their meaning now as clear to her as printed text. Actually, I think the guidance never completely stopped. I think it's been operating through human intuition all along, waiting for us to develop enough to consciously recognize it. Dr. Kim looked up from her linguistic analysis station. Explain. Elena highlighted specific sections of her translation. According to these records, the ancient minds don't communicate through traditional language or technology. They communicate through what the ancients called pattern resonance, direct transmission of understanding to minds that are properly attuned to receive it. She continued translating the complex technical section. Human brains were specifically modified to serve as receivers for this type of communication. But the signal is subtle, designed to work through subconscious processes rather than overwhelming conscious thought. The ancient minds learned that direct communication tends to cause psychological damage to developing species. Professor Webb leaned forward with intense interest. So what we call human intuition, creativity, problem-solving ability, those might actually be manifestations of ongoing guidance from these ancient intelligences? Elena nodded, her excitement building as she continued to decipher the implications. More than that. According to this text, the reason human technological development has accelerated so dramatically in the past century is because we've reached the threshold where conscious cooperation with the guidance becomes possible. She turned to another tablet that had been discovered just days earlier. This one contains what appears to be activation protocols. Instructions for human populations who are ready to begin conscious communication with the ancient minds. Director Harrison's face went pale. Activation protocols? You mean like a manual for establishing first contact? Elena began translating the relevant section, her voice growing more confident as the ancient symbols revealed their secrets. The process begins with individuals who show exceptional pattern recognition abilities, people who can solve problems in ways that seem impossible, who can intuitively understand complex systems without formal training, who can perceive connections that others miss completely. She looked around the room at the assembled scientists, realizing that she was describing herself and several others present. These individuals serve as focal points for stronger signal reception. As their abilities develop, they begin to influence others around them, gradually expanding the network of conscious cooperation. Dr. Foster had been quietly studying the archaeological evidence from the most recent excavations. Dr. Vasquez, we found additional chambers beneath the main ruins. The preservation is remarkable, and some of the technology appears to be active. Elena's heart skipped. Active? What do you mean? Power sources that still function after 10,000 years. Environmental systems that activated when we opened the chambers. And what appears to be a communication array that began operating the moment we started translating the tablets. Elena stood up quickly, nearly knocking over her chair. We need to examine those systems immediately. If the ancient communication technology is still functional, it might be responding to our translation work. As the team moved to the newly discovered chambers, Elena felt a strange sensation growing in her mind. It was as if something vast and gentle was focusing its attention on her, observing her thoughts with benevolent interest. The feeling had been growing stronger each day as her translation work progressed, but she had assumed it was just the psychological effect of immersing herself in ancient texts. Now she wasn't so certain. The underground chambers were unlike anything Elena had seen before. The walls were covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change as she watched them, adapting their configuration to become more readable. The technology was seamlessly integrated into the stone architecture, as if the boundary between art and science had been completely eliminated. The communication array activated 3 days ago, Dr. Foster explained, leading them to a circular chamber where crystalline structures hummed with barely audible energy. It's been transmitting a signal toward the galactic core, but we haven't been able to determine what kind of information it's sending. Elena approached the crystal formations, feeling the strange mental sensation growing stronger. As she got closer to the array, symbols began appearing on its surface, not carved or projected, but somehow emerging from within the crystal matrix itself. "It's responding to my presence," she said quietly. The symbols were different from the ones on the tablets, more complex and multidimensional. But somehow Elena could understand them, as if the meaning was being transmitted directly into her mind rather than processed through her eyes. "Elena?" Director Harrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" She realized she had been standing motionless for several minutes, completely absorbed in the crystal array's communication. The symbols were telling her things, not in words or images, but in pure understanding that bypassed her normal thought processes. "They're here," she whispered. "The ancient minds. They've been waiting for us to rediscover the communication systems." The crystals pulsed brighter, and, suddenly, Elena was aware of a presence that was vast beyond comprehension yet somehow intimately familiar. It felt like coming home to a family she had never known existed. Words formed in her mind, not in any human language but in concepts that her brain automatically translated into understanding. Child of the distant star, you have done well. Your people are ready to remember their purpose. Elena found her voice, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking aloud or thinking her response. "Are you the ones who guided humanity's original expansion? The ones Mira wrote about? We are their children, as you are Myra's children. The great gathering approaches, and all the scattered families must prepare. Your species has grown strong during the silence. Now you must grow wise." Images flooded Elena's consciousness, visions of human colonies scattered across the galaxy, some thriving on worlds of unimaginable beauty, others struggling to survive in harsh environments, all of them preserving different aspects of human potential. She saw other species, intelligences so alien that human language had no words for their thought patterns, yet somehow fundamentally compatible with human understanding. "Your role remains unchanged." The presence continued. Humanity will serve as the bridge between forms of consciousness that could not otherwise communicate. But first, you must reunite your scattered people and prepare for contact with minds that think in ways you cannot yet imagine. Elena felt the team's eyes on her, realized that they were watching her have a conversation with something they couldn't perceive. She tried to explain what was happening. "They're not just ancient minds," she said, her voice shaking with the magnitude of what she was learning. "They're the descendants of the original intelligences that contacted early humanity. There's been an entire civilization developing parallel to ours, waiting for us to reach the point where conscious cooperation becomes possible." The crystal array pulsed again, and Elena received another flood of information. Star coordinates, technological blueprints, cultural protocols, everything humanity would need to locate their scattered colonies and prepare for the larger galactic convergence. "The signal that guided humanity's original expansion has resumed," she continued, translating the alien concepts into words her colleagues could understand. "But, this time, instead of subtle subconscious guidance, we're being offered full partnership. Conscious cooperation in preparing the galaxy for contact with intelligences from beyond our local stellar group." Director Harrison was recording everything, but Elena could see the struggle in his face as he tried to process the implications. "What exactly does that mean? What are we preparing for?" The answer came to Elena with crystalline clarity. There are other galaxies, other forms of intelligence that have been developing independently for millions of years. The ancient minds have been monitoring galactic development, waiting for species to reach sufficient maturity for intergalactic contact. We're approaching that threshold. She turned to face the team, her mind still partially connected to the vast intelligence that was sharing its knowledge with her. Humanity's unique traits, our adaptability, our curiosity, our ability to understand different perspectives, these weren't accidental evolutionary developments. We were specifically designed to serve as ambassadors when different galaxies begin to interact. Professor Webb was staring at his biological scanner readings with amazement. "Elena, your brain activity is showing patterns we've never seen before. It's as if additional neural pathways are activating in real time." Elena could feel the changes happening in her mind, connections forming that allowed her to process information in ways that seemed impossible moments before. They're activating dormant genetic protocols, abilities that have been waiting in human DNA for thousands of generations. the enhancement process Mira described in her journals. The presence in the crystal array shared one final piece of information, and Elena gasped at its significance. There are 12 major human colonies scattered across this galaxy. Each one developed different specializations, different aspects of human potential. Earth was the baseline colony, designed to preserve core human traits. But there are others, populations that developed enhanced mathematical abilities, others with expanded empathic perception, some with technological intuition that surpasses anything we've achieved. She looked around at the faces of her colleagues, seeing them not just as fellow researchers but as representatives of a species that was about to rediscover its true scope and purpose. "We need to contact Earth Command immediately," Director Harrison said. "This is beyond anything our current protocols can handle." Elena nodded, but she was already thinking further ahead. "We need to do more than report this discovery. We need to start preparing for our role as galactic ambassadors. The ancient minds are willing to guide us, but they can't do the work for us. Humanity has to choose to embrace its destiny." As the team began implementing emergency communication protocols, Elena remained connected to the crystal array. The ancient intelligence was sharing final instructions, preparing her to serve as humanity's first conscious liaison with the broader galactic community. "The gathering will begin within your lifetime," the presence informed her. "Your species must be ready to speak for Earth, to represent the perspective of a young but adaptable intelligence. The future of intergalactic cooperation depends on bridges like you." Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders, but also a sense of profound excitement. Humanity wasn't alone in the universe. They never had been. They were part of a vast community of intelligences, each contributing their unique perspective to a growing understanding that spanned galaxies. "We're ready," she said aloud, speaking both to her human colleagues and to the ancient minds that had guided humanity across 10,000 years of development. "We'll do everything we can to be worthy of what you've given us." As the crystal array pulsed with approval, Elena realized that her simple desire to translate an impossible text had led humanity to rediscover their true heritage among the stars. The real adventure was just beginning, and it would take them far beyond anything they had ever imagined possible. The galaxy was waiting, and humanity was finally ready to come home.